What's good on YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here bringing another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Power Rangers Hyperforce. This episode was really good. It was an episode that I was surprised that it was actually going to be as good as it was. It was definitely a mystery as far as what it was going to be like because we're exploring an era that's pretty unfamiliar to most. But it was an episode that did have something to do with Power Rangers history. So it wasn't like it didn't exist in the franchise. It wasn't some brand new, completely original concept. It was something that what they took it from was the episode when Wes in Power Rangers Time Force gained his battleizer. During that episode, there's a whole situation where there are these knights and Wes has to fight a dragon, and eventually he gets a gem which leads to him gaining his battleizer. That's where they took this from. That was explained in the Fireside chat, so if you're wondering how this is connected to Power Rangers in any way, that's the connection. Again, obviously this is also based off of mythological writings and different texts that have been said in the past throughout history. So, I mean, I'm sure many of you have heard of, King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, Lady Guinevere, some of these different concepts, Knights and Dragons, all that stuff, like during the Dark Ages. That was their connection, and then they obviously took things into an original way and made it work with the show, which totally made it interesting to see. Again, that's the main connection. As a whole, this was fairly original in concept, but it worked really well. And just as a whole, it was fun. But of course, the other thing to keep in consideration is there was no Marv this episode, which was interesting, obviously, because this is the second time we've had we've had one Ranger missing. Last time was with Jack during the Christmas episode. This time it is with Marv because of the fact that story versus Jack's situation, which was more of like he had to have some surgery done on him. So it's a little different because, like, in Jack's case, it was more of like health stuff as opposed to Marv's case, where it's more of the story makes it possible for him to not be needed in this episode at all. So a little different, but works fine. And of course, there's always the potential that all of them, or at least one other Ranger at some point, might end up not appearing for an episode. Definitely a possibility. But we did have a guest star this episode, so it wasn't just 4 Rangers. We did have a guest star. The guest star was Ali Gonino. Now, many people might be thinking to themselves, who's Ali Gonino? I've never heard of her in my life. Is she from Power Rangers? Has she been in any seasons before? She has not. She's not a past Ranger at all. She's actually a actress, composer, and professional Dungeons and Dragons player. So she has so in other words, she's not a Ranger. She's not connected in that way. She isn't going to become the 6th Ranger. She played the character of Lady Guinevere in this episode, which was cool. She definitely doesn't know Power Rangers. It's very obvious she was there because they wanted a guest star. They wanted someone original. They didn't want to do a past Ranger because that could create problems. And because of the fact that, like, it doesn't really fit the era, any of the Ranger seasons that much. The only one that you could kind of see it for, which people were kind of guessing was a possibility, was Mystic Force, but they didn't go that route. They went for the Camelot based story, which was fine. So what they did end up doing with her was, they made her Guinevere. The episode, let's get into it, starts off with the Rangers actually being brought to the castle where the Knights of the Round Table rest. The 3 knights that the Rangers originally met were Sir Lancelot, Sir Edward, and Sir Galahad. Sir Galahad. Now, each of which has a different role in this episode. Some more than others have greater significance. For starters, what happens in this episode is the Rangers explain their current situation regarding their ship being damaged and also about their friend being missing. At the same time, Guinevere explains their situation, which is that their king is missing, King Arthur. So what they learn is that King Arthur was on a mission with Lancelot trying to slay a dragon, and what happened is that at one point the king disappeared and the dragon appeared and Lancelot got away barely. So at that point, what happened was is that the Rangers say that they will help, and if they'll help, obviously, and they both decide to work together, obviously. Additionally, what does end up happening is that they end up also being treated to fine meals, and there we also find out about Sir Edward, which Sir Edward is actually Eddie's great grandfather from several generations in the past. He is Sir Edward the Second, and Eddie is Sir Edward the 25th. Now that's something that isn't said in the actual episode, and the only way that you'll know that in the episode is if you watch the Fireside Chat. So keep that in mind. That is something that's only confirmed in the Fireside Chat. That yes, Eddie is the 25th iteration of his bloodline, and he is based off of an actual Sir Eddie Banks, but that Eddie Banks is one that's more recent and a writer, not a knight. So a different type of knight, obviously. So what does end up happening is from here they obviously want to keep an eye on Edwards, that he doesn't get killed, because if he dies, then Eddie could die, and that obviously could mean a short life for Eddie, which is not fun. But it is interesting to see. Eventually, they are being dined and given nice bedding and everything, and they end up going to a nice dinner and dancing. And Vesper pretends to be a man because she wants to be a man for once, and she ends up calling herself Vesparo, which is interesting. And there's lots of different conversations that occur. They each get plenty of food. And one thing that actually happens, which was pretty interesting, that they kind of created, which apparently they're trying to get rid of a lot more of, is the whole burrito bit, because there's so much of it in a number of episodes. In this case, they made it where Chloe makes the first burrito ever, which is pretty interesting. So what she ends up doing is she ends up taking some bread, she ends up taking some meat, and she ends up taking some cheese and making it into a burrito, which she shows it before Lady Guinevere and everyone else. And, it's a little bit of a concern. Of course, the other character that I didn't really mention yet is Merlin. Merlin is in this show. What does end up happening eventually is Merlin ends up talking to Alpha 55 at one point, and Merlin knows of the morphing grid, which is actually pretty interesting to think about, Merlin knowing of the morphing grid, and he is their wizard, the Rangers of that time. Now, wait, those Rangers? Well, sort of. So we'll get into that, but let's just say this much. The people of that time, some of them have powers similar to the Rangers. What that means is they have a similar power source that allows them to unlock armor similar to how the Rangers morph. So what happens is that they think that the Knights of the Round Table are basically a primitive version of the Power Rangers. They're just heroes with these powers, rather than having to be Power Rangers. A little different, but kind of like the idea behind that. What does end up happening is that they try to learn more about the dragon, try to learn how he appeared, and apparently he when the dragon appeared, King Arthur disappeared, and at the same time Lancelot didn't see anything. And there's conversations that occur between Jack and Merlin, and then later on what happens is that like the dragon attacks the castle. Guinevere ends up shooting the dragon in the eye, knocking it out and making it go in retreat. And later on in the episode, everyone falls asleep, but Jack goes to speak to Lancelot about the situation. And yeah, Lancelot didn't know anything. All he knows is that when Arthur disappeared, the dragon appeared. And also that the dragon seems to appear at night. So those are the key points. They also discuss how what tactics they could take to get to the dragon. The two approaches that they were considering was approaching by the coast or approaching through the dark forest. Both of which they do take at one point in the episode, but it is interesting to see because of how they do things. So they start off with dark forest, which in the continuation of the episode in the morning when they wake up and everything, everyone goes along pretty much, aside from Lancelot and Callahan, who end up helping with fixing the Rangers' ship. So in the meantime, what ends up happening is that the Rangers get ready to travel by horse. Each of them has different names for their horses. I mean, most of them do. The only one that doesn't really is Jack, but everyone else has a name at one point. And the thing is that also Edward doesn't have a wife, so he has no one to come home to. So in other words, like Eddie keeps trying to find ways to make it so that Edward of the past gets a girl so that he can be born. And that's kind of interesting, of course. But yeah, there is all that with like wooing and all that, which is interesting. Eddie also tries to speak to Alpha about contacting Marv, which they discuss the idea of maybe finding a power that could allow them to contact Marv, because they don't have that kind of energy in this time period to be able to speak to Marv or anyone from a different time period right now. So what does end up happening is that they do discuss that. In the meantime, Alpha does go back with the two knights to fix the ship, and then the Rangers go to look for the dragon. They end up heading through several forests and eventually are into the dark forest where it's super dark. So they end up actually changing their path to the coastal path, where they're confronted by some harpies. The harpies are these bird-like creatures that have female human faces that end up actually attacking Edward, and at one point Edward is dropped into the sea and he almost dies and drowns, but fortunately he actually does survive. But he is lured in by the harpies, which are sirens that try to drive him into falling in love with them, which could potentially kill him. So all this is brought up. Eventually they do end up actually singing to the harpies to actually make them listen to this terrible music, and also drive Edward away from liking the sirens, because he's like falling in love with one of them, and at the same time Eddie even tries to fall in love with one of them without meaning to. So it's interesting. All this does happen. There's lots of different situations that occur in this. Chloe even morphs at one point to help out Eddie, and eventually they do end up rescuing Edward, and it's pretty interesting to see. Chloe does some stuff. Eventually, I'm just trying to double check things over here. They do end up heading over towards a cave where they end up prepping their weapons as the dragon appears. The dragon actually is able to talk, which is interesting, and he warns the people to stay away or he'll kill them, basically, because he doesn't know his own strength and he's just going to do it. So all that does happen. Guinevere, Chloe, and Jack go into the cave to do some looking around for Marv and Arthur, but in the meantime Vesper and Eddie try to go and reason with the dragon. The thing is, that doesn't work so well. They get into fights, they beat on him, and at one point in the meantime, Vesper, Chloe, and not Vesper, Chloe, Guinevere, and Eddie go and find some tracks which are of Arthur's, and the thing is that they know it's recent, but they don't know where Arthur is, and they don't know where Marv is, so clearly they don't know enough information. They find also like clothing and other things that are of that time period, which is interesting. All this does happen. It's pretty interesting to see. Eddie even shoots his Oceanus blades into the dragon's nostrils to create a disturbance in its nose, which is interesting. And Guinevere uses her bow to even try to shoot the dragon again. It's pretty interesting, all these different situations. Jack morphs. I mean, all of them at one point do end up morphing. And the dragon eventually, after constant fighting and battling in different situations, is revealed to be King Arthur, which is pretty cool. King Arthur, yes, was the dragon, something that was kind of expected, and what ends up happening is that after they retrieve the dragon, they end up also going back out of the cave. Now, one thing I forgot to also mention was that Lady Guinevere actually had a little dragon called Richard, which I didn't mention that. The little dragon actually helped out in a few situations, one of which was when Jack lost his hammer, and the dragon ended up finding it after a few minutes. So that is something to consider. Again, very small character. These characters are probably not going to show up in any other episode, and they don't have any significance to the overall franchise aside from this, but it is something interesting and nice to note that it does exist. They created some sort of character like that. What we ended up finding out was that after Arthur ended up finding Morgana Leffy, he ended up becoming this dragon, and he wanted to stay away from everyone else so that he wouldn't kill them or scorch them with his dragon form. And since they defeated the dragon, he is now not going to become a dragon ever again in this state. So it's pretty interesting, and that's actually important because usually Arthur is known for being the one that slayed the dragon rather than becoming the dragon. So that's kind of important, but obviously this is before he becomes king of England and all of that. So that is something to consider, of course. Eventually they ask about finding some way to speak to Marv, and what they end up discussing is giving a gem to Chloe, because they end up doing a dice roll which determines Chloe to be the one that will be chosen, and she gets a pink gem that will allow at least her. It's not very clear as to whether or not it will be all 6 of them. I would think possibly all 6 of them, but at least Chloe will gain the battleizer, which is important to note. That yes, they just gain the ability to upgrade their armor. That's cool. I forgot to also mention this episode, this is something important, which is that Guinevere actually, each of the Knights of the Round Table have gems that represent what color they are and their knight form. So for example, Guinevere has the white gem, Edward has the blue gem, which makes sense because he obviously is the ancestor of Eddie. I believe Lancelot had the orange gem, and King Arthur probably had the red gem, but he isn't necessarily Marv's descendant or anything like that. It's just interesting to note that. But yeah, each of them have different gems. Eventually they do end up returning back to the ship, where they end up being teleported there, and they also end up creating a party to get Edward married. So they're gonna have a royal ball or banquet to kind of get him hooked up with someone, which is nice because Eddie basically insists upon that happening, even though he won't be there to see it. He wants to make sure that Edward does get married so that he actually is born. That doesn't end up happening. Eventually in the ship they do end up communicating a message to Jen Scott, telling her about finding Mars coordinates and helping out in any way she can in her current state. So they do have some way of communicating with her. Obviously we don't see Erin Cahill actually appear in this episode, but the message is supposed to be brought over from the past to the future so that things are cleared up. Again, most likely next episode will be them actually heading to get Marv. Since he wasn't here in this episode, if next episode that is the case, he probably will be rescued early on in the next episode if they head directly to where he is located. Again, we still don't know what's happening, so he might be out of the next episode as well. It's really not clear because they're not going to make him sit there for hours on end doing nothing unless they actually give him an opportunity to explore something inside the Alliance ship while the Rangers are looking for him. That could also happen. That would be kind of cool. As a whole, this episode was good. The Fireside Chat was actually super funny. Usually the Fireside Chats are okay. Sometimes they're funny. But the combination of Andre and Paul, and Paulie, who play Jack and Eddie, is just gold. Such gold, because they're both funny people and really interesting to hear. And then everyone else that part of the staff and crew that gets involved in the Fireside Chats really just makes it such an awesome experience. But Paulie is just ridiculously funny. When he was in Power Rangers initially, he was funny, but he is a funny person in general. He really just deserves to just have his own show and have his own opportunity to just talk and be funny. We also got some little update on the Order, which was that movie that was supposed to be made 2 or 3 years ago now, and apparently they're still hoping to get that movie done. It's not clear yet as to when it will be done, but he's actually going to look into it. Paulie Schreier, he's going to look into what's going on with that and actually report back to everyone who is interested about what's happening with the Order, because many people ordered their DVD so that they can get the movie when it comes out. And to this day, we still haven't gotten it. It's supposed to have all these Rangers appear. So that's something to note. I love to know your guys' opinions. Did you guys enjoy this episode? Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you guys think. I know there was a bunch of stuff that I said here and there. Some of it I said out of order just because of the fact that it's late. I'm tired. And honestly, I would say this episode was a lot of fun. I just want to see where things go from here. Again, we are in an interesting time period. So, they're leaving it now, and the question obviously is, where are they going? The ship has been fixed now so they can travel, but where are they going to go? They don't know where Marv is, so I want to know all that and more in the next episode. Obviously, whatever time period they head to could mean that the first episode that they head into will be the episode that we get another guest actor appear. I kind of doubt it because that's really, really quick, but we'll have to wait and see. I would think more likely than not, wherever they end up traveling to, they probably will reach there, and then the follow-up episode will more likely than not be the episode that the guest actor appears, if not the following after that, meaning I would imagine the next guest appearance will be episode 12 or 13. Well, actually not 12 or 13. Well, this is episode 11, so episode 13 or 14, I would say. More than not would be the next guest appearance. Could be next episode, but we'll have to wait and see. Overall, this episode was a lot of fun, lots of humor, lots of good bits, some serious story, some also kind of comedic story, and it was an interesting time period that really isn't that explored that often. So overall, pretty good. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you think, and I'll see you guys in the next video soon. Until then, guys, I'm Crazy Sarah 71, and goodbye, guys.